Welcome into One of One Sports. We're coming off a great week of predictions from week 5, and we'll break it down real quick before we get into this week's. We went 5-0 in the game breakdowns, which I was really happy with because Alabama Georgia was a tough call, but we got it right. And we predicted Arizona over Utah in our game breakdowns. We hit on Kansas State over Oklahoma State. We got Notre Dame over Louisville, so it was a great week for that. And then we went 8-2 overall because we missed on UCF, Colorado, and then there was one more game we missed on that I gave out. Let me check it real quick. We picked Baylor to upset, or we picked Baylor to beat BYU, but BYU won again. So those were the only games we got wrong, but did really well last week. And you can see you're 23-3 on the season, 35-14 overall. So let's see if we can keep the hot streak going. And starting off with the notable games that I'm not going to do a full breakdown on. We got 5 of them once again. And the first one I was on a Friday. And UNLV I'm taking to beat Syracuse. This UNLV's at home. I tend to pick the home team on Friday nights, even though this year that hasn't really been holding up. There's been a lot of road wins on Friday. But I do think UNLV is actually a little bit better than Syracuse. Now, it's hard to say because, they lose their quarterback, but then they look even better than they've looked the rest of the season. Maybe it was like a rallying cry after he leaves with the NIL stuff. And it's not like he was going crazy. Like, against Houston, he had 71 yards passing, and against Kansas, he had 86. Now, he's a good runner, but their backup comes in and he throws for 182, which is their high mark of the season. They put up 59 points on Fresno State. So I think they're even better without the quarterback, to be honest. And Syracuse is a pretty good team, but we saw them lose to Stanford at home. So I think Syracuse very beatable, and UNLV I think keeps rolling, gets the win at home. Then I've got Nebraska defeating Rutgers. I think Rutgers getting a little too much hype. A lot of people talking about not Nebraska. A lot of people talking about Rutgers and Indiana as like sneaky Big Ten teams now. I feel like that's what happened with Nebraska early in the year. Then they lose, and I feel like Rutgers isn't actually like a really good team. They've just had a fairly workable schedule, and I mean, I think they're still good. Like, they beat Virginia Tech, and Virginia Tech's a solid team. They beat Washington. I think Washington's pretty good, but I think Nebraska's the best team they'll have faced yet, and I think Nebraska at home gets the win, and Rutgers' undefeated season comes to an end. Next up, UNC over Pitt. I took UNC. I made a video saying I was buying stock in North Carolina. They subsequently lose to James Madison. I then picked them over Duke last week. They get up 20-0 and then let Duke score 21 unanswered points and lose the game. And now here I am again, picking them to win another game against Pittsburgh, who is undefeated. Maybe it could be ill-advised. It seems ill-advised, but I don't believe in Pitt. I think they're for one of the worst undefeated teams. I think there's only 19 undefeated teams left. Pitt could definitely be the worst, up there with like a Duke. But then again, North Carolina couldn't beat Duke. One thing I am nervous about is Pitt is coming off the bye, so they're well rested, and North Carolina's coming off like that pretty brutal loss. So I feel like there's a chance that Pitt's just in a better spot mentally. But I don't know. I don't believe in this Pitt team. It's really hard for me to see this team getting to 5-0. So I'm going with the upset with North Carolina winning. And our fourth game we got here, it's going to be Indiana defeating Northwestern. And this is one, I think this is a trap spot. Indiana's getting so much hype after their hot start to season. You beat Maryland last week. And like I said, them and Rutgers are getting like the sneaky Big Ten label. And Indiana, I think, is a pretty good team. But we saw them for the first time kind of struggle against Maryland because the quarterback threw for a lot of yards but also turned the ball over. And I think coming off that game, Northwestern, not a great team, and Indiana's favored by 13.5. But Northwestern is coming off a bye, and they're still a Power 4 opponent. I just think it's like a tricky spot. I think Indiana wins, but this one, it piqued my interest as, could this be like an upset? But I'm going Indiana to win. Not that I'm betting on it, but I would think Northwestern would maybe cover the 13.5. But again, Northwestern's not very good, so there's chances just another Indiana blowout. My final game before we get into the previews is Iowa State over Baylor. Not really a hot take, but I feel like the Big 12 is just so unpredictable that you never know what could happen. Like, Baylor goes down 28-0 to BYU, then almost comes back to win. So you never know what's going to happen. Baylor looks like they have Colorado beat and then lose off of Hail Mary. So it's just so unpredictable, but I do think Iowa State is potentially the best team in the Big 12 right now. I think I keep it rolling. So those are games that I'm not breaking down, but handing out, and then we'll get into the game breakdowns. So the first game breakdown is, I believe, the only AP Top 25 matchup of the weekend. Not that means a whole lot because I think the AP poll has just been terrible this year. But that's for another time. But point is, maybe the biggest game of the weekend, and that's the Missouri Tigers going to College Station to take on the Texas A&M Aggies. Let's break it down. So my keys to the game here, the first one I have is, can the Missouri offense put it together? And what I mean by that is, we know that it can be really good, right? Because we saw him last year. We know how good Luther Burden is. We know how good Theo Weiss is. We know Mookie Cooper can do some nice things. We know Brady Cook can be really good. We've seen it all happen before. But this year, the offense hasn't been nearly explosive and as good as last year. And it's strange because that was supposed to be a strength of the team. The defense was where I had question marks, at least. But the defense has been really, really good. So if the offense can put it together and look like it did last year, Missouri can live up to all the expectations that they have for this season. And I think the main thing that's going to allow us to happen is just Brady Cook playing better. I think he's really the crux of the issue right now. And he's not playing terrible. I'm not trying to knock him or anything. But just last year he played really, really well. And this year I think he's just been like an average quarterback. And I think for Missouri to look like a top 10 team, he's got to be a really good quarterback for them. And I know he can do it. He just hasn't done it yet this year, but we've seen it. And he definitely can. And that's what I'm looking for him to do this weekend. And then my second key of the game is the Texas A&M QB, just the whole situation. Is it going to be Reed or is it going to be Wigman? Obviously, Reed's been winning the games, but Wigman was initially the starter. And there's a chance Wigman's not even healthy, so that the decision's made for Coach Elko. But there's also a chance Elko has to make a tough decision. Does he go with the player, that all offseason thought was his starter, gave him the best chance to win? Or does he go with the true freshman who's been playing well lately and won all the games he's played so far? And they do different things, right? Wigman, more the pocket passer. Reed, more of a dual threat than Wigman. So maybe there's a chance. Do you think Missouri's, if you think they're more gettable in the run game, you go with Reed. Maybe if you want to pass it more, you go Wigman. I don't know what they're going to do, but it's definitely a key to the game because, it's the quarterback of the football team. It's very important, and they do such different things that whoever they go with, it could completely change the outcome of the game going with one quarterback or the other, depending on how well they're ready to play. Third key point, and that's going to be the Missouri O-line. I was talking about how Brady Cook needs to play better. And part of playing better and hitting receivers, you got to have time to get the ball to them, right? Not that he hasn't had it this year, but, you've played Boston College, you played Buffalo. You haven't played really great defensive lines. And although Texas A&M's defensive line hasn't been quite as good as I thought it would be this year, it's still with guys like Nick Scourton, if he's healthy, Gabriel Brownlow, Dindy, all those five-star recruits, Shamar Turner, Shamar Stewart, those guys are all on the D-line for A&M, and they definitely will be the best D-line Missouri's faced this year and will be the toughest test for that O-line, and it's going to have to hold up and give Brady Cook time to get the ball to Luther Burden, Theo Weiss, etc. And the final key point is that it's the Texas A&M skill positions because of how good Missouri's been on defense. And that's on the line and in the secondary. And Texas A&M has not been really explosive. Le'Veon Moss has been very good at running back. From what I watched, I like him. But on the perimeter, they've been inconsistent at best. I don't really see anyone who's emerged as a clear go-to guy. So there's a lot of work to do there against a Missouri defense that's been really good. And Boston College isn't a great team, but they're pretty good on offense. And outside of catching Missouri early, the defense shut them down most of the game. And I just think this Missouri defense really good and can probably limit Texas A&M, especially if there's not someone who steps up at wide receiver. So for our final score prediction, I'm going to go with Missouri to win. So it's actually, I'm predicting upset. Texas A&M is favored because they're at home, and I guess Vegas thinks these teams are similar. Texas A&M's favored by 2. I actually think Missouri wins coming off a bye. I think they win pretty convincingly. I'm going Missouri 31, Texas A&M 21. So I guess an upset I'm picking an upset by picking a top 10 team to win. All right, second game we're breaking down. It is the SMU Mustangs traveling to Kentucky to take on the Louisville Cardinals. So keys to the game for this one, I think SMU's inconsistency, right? And part of that I do think has to do with playing multiple quarterbacks. Sometimes they play Preston Stone, sometimes they play Jennings. Jennings has kind of taken over now. But we saw them lose to BYU, which at the time I thought was an indictment on them, but maybe BYU actually seems pretty good, so it's not as bad as previously thought. But they only put up 15 points. And then we saw them struggle with Nevada, who I don't think is a very good team. But then I thought TCU would be able to beat them, and they rolled TCU, put up 66 points. And then they rolled Florida State, who we know Florida State is not good this year. So it's just kind of it's up and down, mainly up. I mean, they're 4-1, but I just don't know what performance to expect from them. And then, so that's why I think if they get the good SMU, they can pull the upset here in Louisville. But if we get, that kind of like shaky team, it's probably going to be a Louisville win. Then Tyler Shuck I have because I think he's very, very good. But there's sometimes the turnovers, right? He had the fumble against Notre Dame. He had the interception. It wasn't really his fault. So you can't really blame him too much for that. But I think he's playing really, really well. And if he continues that, I think Louisville's offense is going to easily move the ball on this SMU defense. So I think Tyler Shuck plays well. Louisville should win. And then turnovers, just because we've seen games where turnovers have and just little things have really affected their games. Like Louisville, fumble, interception, and special teams, I believe it was a blocked punt. But then we've also seen them do well, right? They blocked Georgia Tech's field goal, run it back the week before, which helped them to secure a win there. Same with SMU. We've seen them have a bunch of turnovers that cost them a game, but then we also saw them score, I believe, 3 non-offensive touchdowns against TCU. So both these teams have benefited from it at times and lost because of it at times. So whichever way the turnover and special teams battle goes, there's a chance it could have a big impact since these teams have been impacted by that all year. And then the final one's the Louisville run defense. SMU's been really good running the ball recently, and Louisville's been, okay at stopping the run. It's not like they're terrible, but not great at all. Or not great, but SMU's really got it going with Smith rushing for 129 and 127 the last 2 games. So Louisville just got to make sure to stop the run, force Jennings to throw, because I do think he's somewhat limited as a passer. And if Louisville can do that, I expect them to win. And they did a good job against Notre Dame. Like Riley Leonard only ran for 52. So I do think they're going to be able to limit SMU. I do think SMU will rush for over 52 with their lead running back, but I think they'll be limited. So, final prediction. I'm going to go with Louisville to win this one. I think Tyler Shuck plays well. I think SMU doesn't put up a ton of points, maybe has a couple turnovers. I'm going to Louisville to win 34-23. So, third game here, and that is a rematch of last year's national championship game. And boy, do these teams look different. No Michael Penix this time, no J.J. McCarthy, no Blake Corum, no Roma Dunze, and none of the various other NFL draft picks that were on these teams last year. Just so much different than last year's matchup. And again, Michigan, I believe, is ranked in the top 10 now, but Washington is actually favored by 3. So again, if I pick a top 10 team, I'm actually picking an upset. So that just kind of shows you how in this year's college football, I think you can go about 8-9 teams deep. And after that, the Vegas is saying there's not really a huge gap between teams like 10 and probably 30 some, because Washington's not even ranked. But getting into the keys to the game, the first one I have, and maybe this isn't as important as I'm making it seem, but I wanted to lead with it, and that's Alex Orji's development. We saw in the USC game, he just didn't throw the ball at all. Then, against Minnesota, the first half, he actually threw it a little bit, and then they kind of went away from it. But he still, I think he threw for, 86 yards against Minnesota. So he still has not broken or really come close to breaking 100 yards passing. And that's fine, right? You're going to be a power run team. But, and I'll talk about this a little more in a second, Michigan's had real struggles in the second half, and they've really struggled to keep up a powerful run game for a whole game. So I think if you could take off some of the pressure of that and make a couple throws to a Colston Loveland, and also this on the receivers too, because they're not getting the most separation. But just, maybe take a deep shot, maybe hit a couple easy passes, draw some stuff up. And I know there's a risk with him. He missed some easy throws sometimes. But I think if you don't try at all, it can eventually, maybe it's not against Washington, but eventually you're going to lose a game against an inferior opponent if you can't throw the ball at all. So I think just going forward, his development is going to be key in every game, because at some point, if he doesn't develop, they're going to lose because of it. And I don't know when that's going to be. The next one I have is the Michigan secondary, which has struggled this year outside of Will Johnson. But Will Johnson didn't play last week. And, he's questionable if he's going to play against Washington. I'll check the latest update real quick. But like I was saying, the rest of the secondary has kind of struggled. Even when he was in there, the other half of the other half of the secondary was struggling. And then when you're both out, when he's out, both sides of the field can be beaten. And we saw Minnesota make a lot of plays in the second half. So there's definitely concern there if he doesn't play. Like I said, there's a chance he will play, and I think the reports say he's looking good. I checked him, but he's still questionable. And Washington, with Will Rogers, they can make some plays in the pass game. Maybe not the most dangerous team to expose the secondary, but other team like Minnesota's not the most dangerous team to expose them, and they made plays. So it's definitely a concern for Michigan. And then the Washington run defense, this is actually probably the most important one because we know that if Michigan's going to try to just run the ball down Washington's throat, and I think it has a really good chance of working because if you saw the Friday night game between Washington and Rutgers, Kyle Monagai, I hope I'm saying his name correctly, for Rutgers, very good running back, and he made some really, really big plays, plays that I think Kalel Mullings can make, and even Donovan Edwards can break a few, even though he hasn't been great this year. And that was the thing. It wasn't like the thing about Washington's run defense is they didn't get. It was 25 carries for 132 yards, but there was one really big play that I'll try to find the exact yardage that Monagai ran for. And he had a long of 40, so we could see Kalel Mullings or Donovan Edwards break a run like that. And if they're able to just run it on Washington and not have to, and Alex Orji's not forced to throw, then obviously that's a recipe for success for Michigan because we know how good their D-line is and how good their defense can be if the secondary is up to par. And final thing I have is just second half Michigan. The last 2 weeks against USC and then against Minnesota, Michigan looked really good in the first half. Like actually like the top 10 team they're ranked as. Like I've been like, oh, this team's actually pretty good. Whereas was skeptical of them after the Texas game and the Arkansas State game. But in the second half, they look terrible. USC was able to come back and definitely could have won the game. And Minnesota arguably should have got the onside kick and had a chance to win as well. So I think part of this is coaching, like adjustments being made for Michigan. Maybe they're not making the correct adjustments. Maybe teams are focusing in on the run more. Or maybe Michigan wears down after a while. I don't know what it is exactly. That's for sure on more to figure out. But he needs to because in the second half, Michigan really struggles and or has really struggled. And to win a game like this where you actually expected to lose, you got to perform in the second half. So final score prediction. Like I said, Washington, at the time of this recording, is a 3-point favorite on the top 10 Michigan Wolverines. I don't think Washington's going to win this game. I think I keep it close, but I've got Michigan winning it 21-17. I think Michigan controls time of possession enough, wears Washington down enough in the run game, and makes just enough plays defensively from guys like Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Will Johnson if he plays, and they make just enough plays to win the game. Next up, we have the Ole Miss Rebels taking on the South Carolina Gamecocks on the road following their following their loss to Kentucky, 20-17. But so keys to the game here. The first one is going to be the Ole Miss run game. In the offseason, they lose Quinshon Judkins, but I still thought with Lane Kiffin, they're usually a really good run team. It'll be fine. And like I said, the first 4 weeks, Ole Miss was crushing teams, but this was their first real game against a quality opponent in Kentucky, and they did not look very good. They couldn't run the ball very well. Outside of Trey Harris, they weren't very dynamic in the pass game. The defense was pretty solid, but we know that Kentucky's offense is very questionable from when they played Georgia and South Carolina. So I'm actually pretty skeptical of this Ole Miss team right now, especially their run game. Now, I will say Kentucky's defense, we're pretty sure is pretty good, right? Deion Walker is a top NFL prospect, but the thing with that is that South Carolina's defense is also really good and could definitely limit Ole Miss the same way Kentucky can. So that's my problem with saying, Kentucky has good defense. So do a lot of the teams that Ole Miss is going to play. So they got to be able to run the ball better. And I trust Lane Kiffin just as a play caller to be able to do something about it and figure out a scheme that'll work. But it's definitely a key to the game. And then the home field and rest advantage are both with South Carolina, and I think that's huge. So Ole Miss is coming off an upset loss. So, and I'll add the next key here, which is can Ole Miss respond? So there's a lot of factors playing here. There's a world where you lose to Kentucky twice. And what I mean by that is you lose to Kentucky, and this team had such high expectations. Now they're doubting themselves. They're like, if we can't beat Kentucky, we still have, Georgia on the schedule. We still have, LSU on the schedule, something like that, right? So they're questioning themselves internally. and they allow themselves to come out kind of flat, not play up to standard again in this game. And so South Carolina has the edge, could have the edge there, while being at home with a really good crowd, I would assume, and coming off the bye. So you're well rested, better prepared potentially. And if that all breaks in your favor, I mean, that's like screaming out upset South Carolina. Now, but the thing about the second one is there's also a world where Ole Miss is like really locked in after the loss, plays like an insanely good game. And I think in that world, the home field and the rest don't really matter because Ole Miss is just playing too well. And I do think that Ole Miss A game, there's so much talent on the roster that if Ole Miss plays their best game, South Carolina won't beat them. And the final key, I just have Kentucky, because does the Kentucky game mean anything for either of these teams, right? We saw them play, technically the same opponent, but I think it's just two different Kentucky teams, the way Kentucky switched between games. But there's a possibility where we see where South Carolina comes out, beats Ole Miss kind of easily, and it's like, well, we could have seen that coming because Ole Miss lost to Kentucky, South Carolina rolled Kentucky, that kind of thing. I lean more towards the Kentucky games, just kind of, it was Kentucky's worst performance of the year is probably going to be South Carolina, and they played maybe their best game against Ole Miss, or definitely one of them. I lean towards that, but there's still a world where we're come back and say, oh, we should have known this by how they performed against Kentucky. So, final prediction. This was really tough because there's a huge part of me that's really skeptical about Ole Miss because I haven't seen them play well against any solid teams. So I'm kind of skeptical, but I'm just kind of leaning all of Lane Kiffin's tenure. They've been really good. They have a lot of players back that I've seen perform really well before. They added so much that I'm struggling to see them losing back-to-back weeks. And I'm going to go with Ole Miss to win it 27-20 in South Carolina. Final game we're breaking down, and that is the Texas Tech Red Raiders, who have bounced back after a tough start to the season, taking on my Arizona Wildcats on Saturday night. So, I know I keep breaking down Arizona games, but they're like my favorite team, so I just gotta do it. And last week was worth breaking down, right? I called the upset over Utah. You don't see many people picking Arizona to beat Utah, and it's not like I've been biased. I picked Kansas State to beat Arizona on these breakdowns, so I've been objective about it, and I predicted all their games right so far this year. Let's see if I can keep the streak going. And talking about the keys to the game, the first one I have is Morton versus Fafita, because I expect this game to be a shootout. Texas Tech's defense, very, very suspect against anybody they play, really. They just played Cincinnati. I think Cincinnati put up 41 on them. The Texas Tech defense just kind of terrible. Abilene Christian put up, I think, in the 50s. And Arizona's offense has the potential to be really good. We've seen it was pretty good against Utah, great against New Mexico, bad against NAU, bad against Kansas State. But we know it has the pieces with guys like we've seen Fafita play really well. We know how good McMillan is, and their running backs are pretty solid as well. So it has the potential. So I think against a bad defense like Texas Tech, Arizona's going to put up a lot of points. And then Texas Tech, they have a lot of offensive firepower as well. Josh Kelly's been really good for them, and Taj Brooks is one of the best running backs in the country. Speaking of which, the Arizona run defense is again a key to the game. We saw Kansas State destroy Arizona in the run game, and then some people thought it'd be rinse and repeat against Utah, but Arizona actually shut down Utah's run game. So now it's again a question: how well will they stop the run against Texas Tech? Texas Tech maybe not as physical as Utah, Kansas State. But Taj Brooks may be the best individual running back out of all of them, although DJ Giddens pretty good for Kansas State as well. But as always with this Arizona team, there's questions about the run defense, and it's going to be a key to every game. So that's why I list it here. And then the Texas Tech defense, I don't really need to rehash this. I was already explaining. This defense is terrible. It's bad at stopping the run. It's bad at stopping the pass. It's just bad. There's not much to it. It's just okay. Against Washington State, it wasn't all their fault because there were too many turnovers, and they played decent against ASU. So maybe it's not as bad as I make it seem, but it's still pretty bad. And the final key is the Arizona secondary, and this actually in a good way, because against Utah, the secondary was ridiculous. An insane amount of pass breaks. The coverage was so tight, and they probably benefited from being allowed to I'm talking both sides of the ball. The refs decided to let the game the DBs and the wide receivers be physical with each other, and it happened to benefit Arizona more because the DBs for Arizona were playing really tight coverage and kept breaking up passes, and Utah's guys couldn't really hang with Arizona's receivers as well. But if, a guy like Takario Davis, who's projected first-round pick and was so good against Utah, what can he do against a guy like Josh Kelly? How much can they limit this Texas Tech offense? So for my final score prediction, I do think it's going to be a shootout. I actually think it's going to be a really tight game. I think Texas Tech will put up a lot of points, keeping competitive, and it'll be a great game Saturday night in Tucson. But I think Arizona is going to win it 37-34 and make a bid to get in the top 25. Let's put them in. Put them ahead of Utah. But that's the final game we're predicting. So I thank you guys for watching this video. I'll have more videos out this week on potential upsets that we could see this week. So keep an eye out for that. But until next time, bye.